I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Luke 10:18. The war in the heavens was swift, brutal, and final. Light and darkness clashed with unimaginable fury, and when the dust settled, the defeated were cast into the void like ash. But what no one tells is that not all the fallen were condemned. Some escaped, some hidden, some never stopped fighting. For centuries, religions have repeated the same story. The angels who defied God were punished with eternal exile. But among the forbidden texts in apocryphal gospels and forgotten codices, there are fragments of a darker truth. Not all the fallen rebelled out of pride or ambition. Some were deceived. Others hesitated at the last moment. And then there are those who made the last pact, a pact so ancient and secret that only a few have uncovered it. A pact that was never broken and that will soon change the fate of the world. But it is not yet time to speak of that. Soon you will understand what it means, and when you do, it may already be too late. The city breathed beneath a sky of ashes and neon. From the top of an abandoned building, a solitary figure watched the streets with the patience of one who had seen centuries pass like leaves carried by the wind. Azael. He was not human, nor was he fallen. He belonged nowhere. While his brothers waged war in the heavens and the exiled burned in their banishment, he had made an impossible choice: to disappear. Not to ascend, not to fall, just to remain. For centuries, he had watched kingdoms rise and crumble, empires devoured by the sands of time. He had walked among kings and beggars, saints and murderers, unnoticed, uninvolved. Because that was the price of his choice: to exist without belonging to anything. But that night something changed. He felt the vibration before he heard it. An ancient force, long buried in oblivion, had just awakened. His instincts tensed. His wings, invisible to mortal eyes, trembled with an echo he had not felt in millennia. The last pact. Azael closed his eyes. It couldn't be possible. That pact should have died with time, buried beneath the mistakes of his brothers. And yet, there it was, pulsing, calling to him. Below, in the streets, a man crossed the city with an old book under his arm. Ethan Moreau, an archaeologist obsessed with the mysteries of forbidden texts. He did not know it yet, but he had just set into motion something that would change everything. Azael watched him from the shadows. He didn't want to get involved. He wasn't supposed to. But the pact had been reactivated, and that meant his time of hiding was over. The library basement was cold, filled with the scent of old paper and dampness. Ethan Moreau ran his fingertips over the worn leather cover of the book before him. It was no ordinary codex. Its pages were made of something thicker than parchment, and its script belonged to no language he recognized. He had found relics before, hidden texts, forbidden gospels, but this was different. An inscription stood out on the cover, written in irregular strokes, as if it had been carved by force. The Last Pact. Ethan shivered. He couldn't explain it, but ever since he had touched the book, something in the air had changed. The atmosphere felt heavier, as if an unseen presence was watching him. Instinctively, he turned toward the door, but the library remained empty. Only the shadows of the bookshelves, stretched by the dim glow of a lamp, kept him company. He took a deep breath and opened the first page. The letters seemed to shift beneath his gaze, rearranging themselves into words in a language he shouldn't have been able to understand. Yet, somehow, he did. Not all the fallen fell. Not all the loyal remained in heaven. Some made a pact that was never revealed, a pact that has now been awakened. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. He didn't know that, at that very moment, atop a nearby building, Azael was watching him with narrowed eyes. He didn't know that by opening that book, he had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Because some secrets must remain hidden, and some pacts were never meant to be broken. The night in the city was darker than usual. Ethan felt that something was wrong. He had spent the last few hours translating fragments of the Codex, but the feeling of being watched never left him. He closed the book and stood up from his desk, rubbing his eyes. The library was closed at that hour, but why did he feel like he wasn't alone? A noise in the hallway. A faint whisper, like a brush against wood. Ethan held his breath. Was he imagining it? He moved slowly toward the door, trying not to make a sound. He turned the handle cautiously and peeked outside. Nothing. Only the flickering light of an old fluorescent lamp illuminating the bookshelves. But when he turned back to his desk, he saw something that made him freeze. The book. The pages were turning on their own, one after another, until they stopped on a new fragment of text he didn't remember seeing before. They are coming. A chill ran down his spine. Who? Before he could process it, the window behind him shattered into pieces. Ethan shielded his face as shards of glass flew around him. A freezing wind rushed into the room, plunging it into complete darkness. And then he saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows, human silhouettes but with something twisted about them. Their eyes reflected no light, and their presence seemed to drain the air from the room. Renegades. They weren't demons. They weren't angels. They were something else. Something that had existed between both sides, walking the thin line of the forbidden. One of them stepped forward. His voice was a deep whisper, but it carried a power Ethan didn't understand. "You should not have read that book." Ethan took a step back, his mind racing. Who were they? What did they want? What did they know about the last pact? But before he could answer those questions, an explosion of light burst through the window, and in the middle of the radiance, a figure fell from the sky with impossible speed. Azael. His wings, invisible to the human eye, cut through the air as he landed between Ethan and the renegades. His gaze was cold, calculating. "He is not yours." The renegades didn't step back. They only smiled. "Azael," one of them whispered, "you shouldn't be here either." And with those words, the hunt began. Ethan panted as he ran through the dark corridors of the ruined library. The floor creaked under his hurried steps, and every shadow around him seemed to move as if it had a life of its own. Behind him, the renegade slid through the gloom, distorted whispers filling the air. Azael moved beside him, his gaze fixed ahead. His presence radiated a strength Ethan didn't understand, but at that moment, it was the only thing keeping him hopeful. "You can't run forever." One of the renegade's voices echoed from the shadows. Azael came to a sudden stop. Ethan halted as well, his chest rising and falling with difficulty. He turned to look at the angel, but something in his expression sent a shiver down his spine. It was the face of someone about to make a final decision. "I don't want to fight." Azael's voice was firm but unwavering. The renegades emerged, forming a semicircle around them. "It's not about what you want, Azael. It's about what you must do." One of the renegades stepped forward. His eyes, dark as the void, locked onto Ethan. "Give us the human. He was never meant to touch that book." Ethan felt his blood run cold. Azael didn't respond immediately. His gaze fell upon Ethan, and for a moment, the archaeologist felt the weight of millennia crash down on him. Here was the truth. Azael could hand him over. He could wash his hands of it and continue his eternal isolation. He could close his eyes and let the last pact remain a mystery. Or he could do the unthinkable. Number. The word rang through the air like a sentence. The renegades tensed. "You know what this means, Azael. If you choose to protect him, if you choose to break your neutrality, there will be no turning back." Ethan swallowed hard. "What are you talking about? What does the last pact mean?" The renegade smiled. "Let him tell you." Ethan turned to Azael. "Tell me, what is the last pact?" Azael clenched his fists. His decision was made, and with it, the balance of the world was about to break. The wind howled through the ruins of the library. Where there had once been books and knowledge, now only ashes floated in the air. Ethan leaned against a collapsed bookshelf, struggling to catch his breath. His mind was still trying to process what had just happened. Azael stood before him, his silhouette outlined against the glow of the moon. But he was no longer the same. Something in him had changed. The renegades had disappeared, but not for long. They knew Azael had made his choice, and that choice had marked him. He was no longer just an angel. He was the last angel. Ethan looked around, searching for answers in the rubble. "Azael, what did you do?" The angel didn't respond immediately. His eyes, which once reflected the indifference of centuries, were now filled with something else, something that shouldn't exist in a being like him. Determination. "I broke the pact." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What does that mean?" Azael exhaled slowly. "It means the balance no longer exists." The archaeologist felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. It took him a few seconds to realize it wasn't an earthquake. No, it was something deeper. The entire world had felt it. The shadows stirred in the corners of the night. Something had been unleashed. Something that had remained dormant for eons. Ethan looked at Azael, his heart pounding in his throat. "And now what do we do?" Azael turned toward the sky. "We prepare, because this," his unseen wings spread with a force that made the air tremble, "is only the beginning." And with a powerful beat of his wings, he vanished into the night. Ethan was left alone, the book still in his hands and a truth he could no longer ignore. The last pact had been broken. The fate of humanity hung by a thread, and the war had just begun.